Have you ever heard about those people who just changed, like, the whole way we think about things?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Like total game changers.
Yeah, exactly. And today we're going to look at one of those big ideas from one of those people and how it came about.
Okay. It laid on me.
It's the Grameen Bank.
Ah, the Grameen Bank. Okay.
And we've got a great source for this.
All right.
It's the founder himself, Muhammad Yunus, and his autobiography, Grameen Bank, Amar Jibon.
So we're getting it straight from the source here.
Straight from the horse's mouth, you know?
Awesome. Yeah, you hear the term microfinance a lot, and it's had such a huge impact.
You know it has.
But going back and actually like reading Yunus's story about how he came up with this whole thing, what his motivations were, like what he struggled with in the early days when he was just starting out, and how his thinking developed and changed, and just those moments when things clicked for him.
Right. Yeah.
It's really powerful stuff, so.
It is. So we're going to kind of distill Yunus's journey and pull out those key moments, those aha moments.
Right.
And what drove him to shake things up.
Love it. Yeah.
You know, the obstacles he had to overcome those first few years.
Yeah.
And the philosophy that really makes the Grameen Bank so important when it comes to tackling poverty.
For sure.
So for those who may not know, like, what is microfinance in this context of the Grameen Bank?
That's a really good question, actually. So in a nutshell, right, microfinance, like the kind that the Grameen Bank does, it's about giving out very small loans, like sometimes just a few dollars, along with some other financial services to people who can't usually get those things from normal banks.
Okay.
You know, people who are really struggling financially.
Got it.
The idea is to give them the power to start their own little businesses or make their existing businesses better.
Right. So giving people tools that they've never had before.
Yeah.
And it all really started because Yunus had this very specific belief about poverty, didn't he?
Yeah, he totally did.
He didn't think it was just something people were born with.
Exactly. And one of the things that really hit me when I was reading Yunus's book was how strongly he felt that poverty isn't like some kind of fate.
Right.
Like, it's not something you're just stuck with from birth.
Okay.
He believed that it's something caused by things outside of your control. Not because of some problem with the people themselves.
I see.
He didn't see it as like people lacking something.
That's a really interesting way to look at it.
And this wasn't just some abstract idea for him.
No.
He truly believed that every human being, no matter what their situation is like right now, has this incredible potential inside them, this creativity and ability to make things better.
Yeah.
And he didn't think poor people were any different.
Right.
In his mind, it wasn't that they couldn't do it.
Yeah.
It was that they just didn't have the chance.
And from what I understand, his idea for the Grameen Bank was about giving them that chance.
Absolutely. And it's so clear from his writing that he saw the Grameen Bank as this way to unlock that potential.
Okay.
It wasn't just about lending money.
Yeah.
It was about giving people the tools they needed to discover their own skills and make their own opportunities.
That's amazing.
And it's fascinating how this whole idea came to him.
Yeah, how did it?
Well, he talks in his autobiography about how he was teaching economics at Chittagong University.
Okay.
And, he was surrounded by all this economic theory.
Right.
But right outside the university in this village called Jobra, people were living in really, really tough conditions.
Wow, that contrast must have been so stark.
Yeah. You can really feel the tension in the book as he's grappling with the fact that, all these complicated economic ideas just weren't actually helping the people who needed it most.
I see.
And it seems like this struggle, this moral dilemma was a big turning point for him. I was like, okay, theory is one thing, but real life is right in front of me, and I can't ignore it.
And that kind of leads us to that famous story about the loan he gave to Sophia Begum and those other women in Jobra.
Oh, yeah, an iconic story, right?
Yeah, can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So Yunus was really bothered by how these local moneylenders were taking advantage of poor people, trapping them in debt that they could never escape,
So he wanted to do something about it.
He did, and he took 85 taka out of his own pocket.
85 taka.
It wasn't a lot of money even back then.
Wow.
And he lent it to a group of women who didn't own any land. And what happened?
Well, it's incredible how Yunus describes how quickly these women started supporting each other and coming up with amazing ways to use that money.
Yeah.
And it wasn't always for what we typically think of as a business.
Right.
Sometimes it was for things like buying more food or fixing up their homes.
So it was about meeting those basic needs.
Exactly. And it challenged the whole idea of what an investment should be,
It's crazy to think that 85 taka could make such a big difference.
I know, right?
And he writes about feeling ashamed, right, like embarrassed that he was teaching economics while right next door people were struggling to even survive.
Yeah, it shows just how much he really cared. And that whole experience really made him question everything the banks were doing.
Oh, yeah, for sure. The standard thinking back then was that lending money to poor people was way too risky.
Because
They didn't own anything to use as collateral, and they were considered like unreliable borrowers, you know?
Right.
But Yunus saw something different.
Yeah.
After seeing the positive changes that came from his small loan, he realized that actually poor people were really motivated to pay back their loans because they had so much to gain from it, you know?
Right.
And it made him realize that their survival and their future depended on it.
So that first loan wasn't just like a one-time thing.
No, not at all. It was the start of a whole lending project he set up in Jobra.
Wow. I bet the banks thought he was crazy.
No, they definitely did. The idea of lending money without collateral, without all the usual safeguards, went against everything they believed in.
Yeah.
They couldn't wrap their heads around the idea of trusting people and believing that they would be responsible.
It was a completely new way of thinking, wasn't it?
Totally. But Yunus was smart about it.
Okay.
He kept track of everything and showed that people were actually paying back their loans at a really high rate.
So he had the data to back up his idea?
Exactly. It wasn't just some wishful thinking.
Right.
But even with the data, getting the banks to actually support this on a larger scale was a whole other challenge.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Convincing the whole financial world to take this seriously was a long road.
So how did the Grameen Bank actually become a real bank then?
Well, it wasn't easy.
I'm sure not.
It started as a pilot project with support from the Bangladesh Bank,
Right.
which gave them some structure and legitimacy, you know?
Right.
But even within the central bank, there was a lot of hesitation, and they didn't fully get what Yunus was trying to do.
It was a slow process.
It took a lot of time and effort from Yunus.
I bet.
And it was only when those early loans started showing real positive results that people started to come around.
So it was the evidence that won them over.
Pretty much. And even then, it was a gradual thing, you know?
Yeah.
But eventually, the Grameen Bank became an official bank.
And this whole model was based on some really different ideas, right? Almost the opposite of how banks usually do things.
Yeah, it's really cool when you look at how Yunus intentionally set up the Grameen Bank.
Okay.
So first, they were laser focused on lending to the poorest of the poor.
Okay.
The people who normal banks would never even consider.
Right.
Then they got rid of the need for collateral altogether.
Wow.
And this wasn't just about blindly trusting people.
Yeah.
The way they did it was through these group loans.
Okay.
So you'd have a group of people all taking out loans together.
Right.
And that group dynamic, that social pressure and support actually worked like a different kind of collateral.
Interesting. So they were holding each other accountable.
Exactly. It was this built-in incentive to pay back the loans because you didn't want to let your group down.
That's so smart.
Yeah. And traditional banks had totally missed that.
And didn't they also focus on lending to women?
They did. That was a huge part of their approach.
Why was that?
Well, Yunus noticed that in a lot of these communities, women were the ones who were mainly responsible for their families.
Yeah.
You know, taking care of their kids, making sure everyone had food and all that.
Right.
So he figured that if women had access to loans,
Yeah.
they'd be more likely to use the money for things that would benefit the whole family.
Okay.
Like food, education, healthcare, all the important stuff.
So it was about creating a ripple effect.
Exactly. And those loans would lead to lasting improvements in their lives.
I see.
Plus, women had amazingly high repayment rates,
Wow.
which proved that this was a really good strategy.
So it wasn't just a social good. It was good business, too.
Yeah, exactly.
And it wasn't long before Yunus started taking this model beyond Bangladesh.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. He became this global champion for microcredit.
Really?
Yeah, he traveled all over the place sharing the Grameen Bank's success story.
So he was spreading the word.
He was, and he spoke at all these international events like the World Food Conference in Washington, D.C. back in 1984.
Okay.
And those appearances really helped to put microcredit on the map.
And get people thinking about it.
Exactly. He was really good at bringing attention to this new way of fighting poverty.
I bet it wasn't always easy, though, was it?
Oh, man. There was a lot of pushback.
Like what?
A lot of the old school bankers and even some development experts just couldn't get on board with lending to poor people without all the traditional safeguards.
Yeah, like collateral.
Exactly. They thought it was way too risky, but Yunus didn't give up.
Well, he had seen it work with his own eyes.
He had, and he kept sharing his data, showing how well the loans were being repaid, and he told these powerful stories about how people's lives were being changed.
So he was fighting an uphill battle.
He was, for sure, but he was so persistent and so passionate about it, and eventually people started to see that this wasn't just some crazy idea.
And the results were undeniable.
Exactly, and by 1986, the Grameen Bank was making a real difference.
Yeah, I was reading that they had millions of borrowers by then.
They did, mostly women.
And the model was starting to catch on in other countries too.
Yeah, it was spreading, and it really shows how powerful Yunus's vision was.
It's amazing how one person's belief can lead to such a huge change.
It really is, and that's what's so inspiring about his story.
Yeah, and for Yunus, this wasn't just about giving out loans, right? The Grameen Bank was part of this much bigger goal, wasn't it?
It was in his autobiography. He keeps coming back to this idea of a world without poverty.
So the bank was like a stepping stone.
Exactly. He saw it as this crucial tool for empowering people.
Yeah.
By giving people access to financial services, he believed they could break free from poverty.
And build a better future for themselves and their families.
Yeah, it wasn't just about money. It was about giving people control over their own lives.
That's so powerful.
And I think that's what makes his story so important.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Grameen Bank and Yunus's incredible journey, what are the biggest takeaways for us?
Well, I think there are three main things to remember.
Yeah.
First, Yunus's unwavering belief in people no matter their circumstances.
Yeah.
He saw potential in everyone.
I like that.
Second, his courage to challenge the way things had always been done.
Yeah. He went up against the whole banking system.
He did, and he proved them wrong.
By showing that poor people could be responsible borrowers?
Exactly. And third, the incredible power of microcredit.
Right.
It wasn't just about the economic impact. It was about giving people hope and dignity.
That's so important.
It was about showing them that they had the power to change their own lives.
And he really flipped the script on how we think about poverty.
He did. He showed that it's not some personal failing, but a problem with the system itself.
And a problem that we can solve.
Exactly. And for me, when I think about that story of him giving that first loan to those women in Jobra, it just sums up everything so perfectly.
It really does.
It was such a small act of kindness.
It's 85 talking, right?
Yeah, and it sparked this whole global movement.
It's pretty mind-blowing.
It shows that even the smallest actions can have huge consequences.
And that believing in people can really change the world.
Absolutely.
So for you listening to this, Yunus's story is a really great way to think about the big problems facing the world today.
Yeah.
It shows us that we don't have to accept the way things are.
Right.
We can question the status quo and come up with new solutions.
Yeah.
And that when we respect people's potential, we can achieve amazing things.
And it makes you wonder, right, if Yunus is right about everyone having these inherent capabilities, what other obstacles are preventing people from reaching their full potential?
It's a good question. And it makes you think about what other innovative solutions we can come up with.
To create a world where everyone has the opportunity to thrive.
That's the dream, right?
It is. And it's stories like Yunus's that show us it's possible.
Totally.
Thanks for joining me for this deep dive into the Grameen Bank.
It's been a pleasure.
It's been really inspiring.
Yeah, it has. And I hope it's given you some food for thought.
Me too.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep believing in the power of human potential.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
All right, take care.
You too.